Well, hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Hello to the folks who are at home. Welcome in person and virtually to the Community Music Center Boston. Thank you all for coming here tonight for this conversation. I prepared several slides for you, but I want you to feel open and confident and comfortable to ask questions as we're going along. I will have some moments inside the presentation for questions, but if you have
no.
So, as I'm moving along, please feel free to ask them. Again, this is meant to be a conversation. It's not fully meant to be a sit and get. Okay, so again, please feel free to ask any questions you might have as we're going along. I'll just give a little bit of framing for this conversation before we jump into the presentation parts. Having done a lot of work in communities, I think now around the country, which is really interesting for me and has been really fun, and engaged in a lot of conversations about community engagement. One of the things that I have recognized is that everyone's heart is really in the right place. Everyone is really trying to do extremely impactful work in communities all over the country. But there's just a little bit of a gap. And this conversation is to start to figure out, well, how do we fill in the gap? Oftentimes in communities, some of the ones that I have not only lived in, but also been partners with, one of the things that it oftentimes appears, and some things that have been shared with me, is that there has been this feeling of colonization. You have this outside entity that goes into a place that kind of ignores in many ways what's already there. It brings in a new product and amplifies it and spreads it, which is basically how colonists worked, right? And so this conversation is a little bit more of an opportunity for us to deconstruct that a little bit, but also to kind of begin discussions around a more inclusive and empowering path forward. So that's really the purpose of this conversation. And I also want to be extremely clear, I do not have all the answers. I don't know everything. I actually don't know a lot, to be honest. What I do know is the conversations I've been in with folks who are never in rooms like this one. Folks who are never in decision-making rooms, folks who aren't engaging in organizations like ours right now, and the things that some of those folks have shared with me about their own experiences, and some things that, to be honest, have being someone who came from a disinvested Black community, from my own experiences growing up there as well. And so again, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I wanted to have some objectives for the day. To be honest, these objectives stay the same for almost every presentation that I do, because these are my objectives as a presenter and as a person existing in the world, to be honest. Identifying supportive ways for individuals and organizations to engage in authentic dialogue about creative inclusive programming, centering our conversation around our shared desire, and that's the assumption that I have. My assumption is we have a shared desire to create a more equitably inclusive arts ecosystem, using our collective talents to engage in a constructive dialogue about the future of our fields. And then this last one is always so important, just moving closer to accepting the fact that there are no solutions that are perfectly right. And that we can develop the humility to understand we might have done wrong, because there aren't things that are perfectly right, but there are some things that are wrong and hurtful. And so really being able to kind of interrogate those things and recognize them when they're happening, but then also asking the right questions. An agenda for the day, welcome. I just gave you some objectives. We'll talk a little bit about equity and inclusion at CMCB. I will make a land acknowledgement. We're going to talk about this concept of unlearning, which I do in almost every presentation because I think it's so important. People walk into presentations thinking they have something to learn, and the truth is it's more that we have things to unlearn. That's such an important thing that we forget, that we have to unlearn some things that we have been taught systemically, culturally, regionally, or whatever. Again, there's this unlearning that needs to happen. We'll codify some terms, which I think is really important. We're just having a conversation with shameless plug, Yoyo Ma today. Yoyo was here today and he's absolutely amazing. Everyone knows that. But we talked a little bit about this idea of what do people mean when they use words like community? Like, what does that even mean? And so we'll codify some terms. We're gonna reframe community engagement programs and really giving organizations, individuals, institutions, just some questions to ask themselves and some dynamics to consider when creating and activating programs. And then we'll close. I'm gonna say bye. Thank you. So equity and inclusion, CMCB has spent we spent several years coming up with a statement for us that has been really helpful for us in decision making. This is the statement here. CMCB welcomes, includes, and values all voices. These voices will continue to include those from different races, ethnicities, sexual orientations, genders, abilities, faiths, nationalities, ages, and socioeconomic statuses. So again, rather than saying, we include people are awesome, we're actually wanting to be very specific, and Mary, you would know you were in those meetings as well. We want to name the things that we were including in our decision-making. And then we had this series of bullet points, program offerings, reflective of the interests of our various communities, curricula that support the neurodiversity of our community, which is really important to us as an organization that engaging in music therapy, resources invested equitably among different partnerships, reflecting the diversity of our communities. We'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about finances. Expanded access to music learning and enrichment within and across Greater Boston neighborhoods. Assembling, creating, recruiting from a diverse slate of candidates for staff, faculty, corporation, and board member positions, and subsequently bringing those individuals into our community as faculty, staff, board members, and the like. Ongoing community conversations to inform our priorities. You are participating in that one right now. Provide for the related, am I reading that right? Yes. Relatedly evolving educational needs of our communities. Create physical spaces that welcome, include, and ensure safety for all. That's something we're talking quite a bit now, especially as we consider a renovation to our space here in the BCA. Implement feedback mechanisms which drive continuous improvement. We've really been thinking about that, particularly as it relates to a recent strategic plan that we've gotten off the ground, and employment and teaching practices that minimize the impact of implicit bias. And we were thoughtful about that language because you can't remove it completely. And the idea is to minimize, you can't remove implicit bias, right? It exists, it is a real thing. What you can do is to minimize the impact of implicit bias, right? So like, I may be biased, but I still hire Black people, right? Right? And so again, it's thinking about it from that perspective. Our land acknowledgement, we do recognize at CMCB that land acknowledgements are a very minimal and small component of a more equitable and just society, but we also commit to making land acknowledgements as well. This is not a moment in which I'm going to say all the things the CMCB is doing and has done, because that always rings as disingenuous. But I would say that we are making a land acknowledgement now, and we continue to engage in our own learning and actually our own practices and thinking about the communities and individuals we invest in. So it seems to be recognized that we are on the unceded territory of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag people, and we pay respects to their elders past and present. We acknowledge the truth of violence perpetuated in the name of this country, so please take a moment to consider the many legacies of displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. We make this acknowledgement as a step towards dismantling the legacy of settler colonialism and with a commitment to social justice. And it's, again, very relevant to the conversation we're having today.
That's awesome.
For those of you who are online, Mary just said, that's awesome. You may not have heard that, but thank you, Mary. We definitely appreciate that on behalf of CMCB. Just to give you a sense of what CMCB does, CMCB does a lot of work all over the cities. We're the largest outside provider of arts education in the Boston Public Schools. We've been working in the Boston Public Schools since the schools started to really work towards integration in the 70s. So CMCB has been in DPS since the 70s. And you can see here, these are some of our partners. In addition to the work that we do in the schools, we also work with health and human services organizations as well, engaging in music therapy programming. Someday, I'm sure over drinks, I'll tell you all about this listening tour that I have been on that has been absolutely fascinating with these partners. But it actually it was actually in many ways the impetus for this particular conversation because of the things that I was actually hearing in some of those really initial conversations that I was having with partners. This is our mission and vision. I'm not going to read that, but just know that CMCB is on this amazing journey right now. When we were, for those of you who showed up late, when Yoyo Ma was here earlier, when Yoyo was here earlier, one of the things he shared, now it was really meaningful to me as a leader. He had a chance to meet with faculty, staff, students, board members, all in kind of a little group. And one of the things he shared with me as we were walking, getting ready to rehearse for our pop-up concert, he said, Lecolion, it's really amazing how unified your community is articulating your message. They're not using the same words, they're not always using the same language, but when you hear people talk, they're saying the same thing. And he said that was, he's like, and to be honest, I haven't experienced that in many places, that you have such a large group of people who are so aligned with where the institution is going. And I really appreciated that from someone who, again, he was meeting everyone for the first time. And he and I, we're not, we're friends. I wouldn't say we're besties, but, so the fact that everyone here was really sharing this message was really powerful, I think, for me as a leader. All right, so on to unlearning. Anyone who knows CMCB has probably seen this slide before, but again, the concept of unlearning is super important to us, and we're constantly thinking about how are we unlearning some things. There's the Yoda quote, "You must unlearn, but you have learned," right? And so that's something that we think quite a bit about. And then I love this Einstein. Or this quote that's attributed to Einstein: "You can't solve a problem with the same thinking that we used when we created the problem." And I love that as a statement because it makes you kind of not only interrogate the problem, but the root of it. And not only the root of it, but even the individuals who were part of the root, right? It kind of forces that upon you. And once you get there, you can say, okay, I could see how those individuals might have made that decision. But now we need new people to make new decisions, right? And being very thoughtful about what that means. Either everyone has to learn a whole new way or unlearn and then learn a whole new way of thinking, or you have to have some people who were never inside that thinking in the first place. So you're engaging folks who were not included in the thing when it was created, because that group and those individuals may have the solutions to the problems that were created in the root of it. So when people talk about being inclusive and diverse, it's not so you can have more brown people to be oppressed by your space, right? It's actually to bring in voices, so new voices who were actually not included in the thing when it was created, right? So there's a difference between being welcomed and being included, right? And understanding that difference is really important. And so again, beginning to think about unlearning is really important. And then, of course, the competing truths. We talk a lot about competing truths at CMCB. If you read the 3 statements here, we are each unique and like no one else. We're like some people, unlike other people. We're each like all other people. All those statements together, they're simultaneously true and contradictory, right? How can I be like no one and like everyone, right? But that helps you as you're thinking about navigating the conversations around colonization and what that is. People can behave as colonizers and still be good people, right? It's those can be simultaneously true. And so recognizing that allows you to be able to move effectively with no blame, no shame, and no guilt, right? Because these are competing truths. My own story is an example of that. I was fortunate to play with some of the best musicians in the world. in some of the most amazing concert halls in the world. And I was really honored to have been able to do that. But I also played in concert halls that were segregated during my parents' lifetime. So I walked into these spaces knowing that my parents wouldn't have been able to go to concerts like the one I was playing when they were kids. Right? So it was a competing truth. I love classical music. I devoted my entire life to it. And I recognize it was also rooted in a legacy of segregation. All right, so it doesn't take away the fact that it's beautiful. It just allows me to be able to say that for me, there were some competing truths within it. So, anyone have any questions about just the frame and any of the things we've shared so far? Anything in the chat? I always say this, either I was really clear or so unclear that it's like, I don't know how to frame a question. You never know. In that case, we'll go on. Okay, so now we're going to codify some terms. Okay, I think it's important to do that. I've done work with some boards, and so I taught a class at the Laundry School, and really the first several weeks we just talked about codifying terms. Let's say what these things mean, and let's make sure we're on the same page with what they mean. So let's go with the first term. What does the word community mean? Right? So the Oxford Dictionary says a community is a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common. It's also a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. So those are the two definitions. That's what Oxford says. Now, here's my opinion of what that word means in practice. In practice, community is a word that people use to describe places they don't want to visit. Right? So people will say, I'm out in the community when they're describing a place that they would never visit. I'm doing community work. I don't know a restaurant there. I don't walk any parks in that place. I don't know anyone who lives there. That's when people say they're in the community. Right? So community is typically used as a term to describe a place that someone would never visit. And so we think about that when we think about the concept of community engagement. Right? And so that is how it is, that's how it's named in practice. Another term, what does the word engagement mean? Multiple clicks here, because there's a lot in it. So I want to break it up for you. Engage, occupy, attract, or involve someone's interest or attention, participate or become involved in, arrange to employ or hire. He was engaged as a trainee copywriter, or enter into conflict or combat with an enemy. Right? Now just a few images to highlight some of those. Two more, there you go. Thanks, Jess. So you see people gathering, armed conflict, right? Attracting. Now engagement as a term, a formal agreement to get married, an arrangement to do something or go somewhere for a fixed time. That's typically how it plays itself out in community engagement. The action of engaging or being engaged, referring to the definitions up top, and a fight or battle between armed forces. So when we think about that as a term, sometimes we can look at some community engagement programs and you see it. You see this kind of push-pull, this fight, right? Between one party and another party. So that's the Oxford definition. Here's what I actually borrowed some of these as what it means in practice. Engage, participate, or become involved in, right? I went there, I participated, or enter into conflict or combat with an enemy. Engagement, arrangement to do something or go somewhere at a fixed time. We're going over there that day and that time to do that thing. We're putting on our hard hat. We're going down to do that thing, and we're bouncing after that, right? And at that point, we have been in the community, a place we would never visit. Right, so it's important to, and the reason I start off with just kind of naming the things is because it's important to understand what are we solving for. It's always the first question. Yeah, Vicky.
Also, it can be the invitation to be community at the table.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what you're talking about is the aspiration.
I don't know if I call it that, but when you I'm kind of being funny, but I am being literal. When you are community in the room, you're very aware of it. So you know, because you know how you describe the engagement was on the terms of the benefactor side. But when you're the community being engaged, it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, so you're gonna, that's actually the next slide. Can you go to the, yes.
Can we just repeat the question really quickly for the chat?
Oh, sorry. The comment was when a lot of these frames are from the perspective of the, for lack of a better term for now, the colonizer, rather than from the perspective of the colonized. Right? And so I do appreciate that. The next slide actually is from the is kind of many ways from the perspective of the colonized, because this is how the things play themselves out. Oh, actually, no, there's someone after that. This is the aspirational goal, what we wish community engagement was. If we're putting and piecing some of those definitions together, community engagement aspires to be defined as a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals in service of becoming more involved with one another, and possibly even going so far as to have a formal agreement to marry, right? To be so connected. What'd you say?
To marry funding.
Yeah, to marry funding. Actually, that's right. So we're actually going to talk about that too. Vicky said to marry funding. Yeah, but you know, to marry, to like bring ourselves together, right? As a union between each other. Like that's community engagement. It aspires to be that. Now, in practice, community engagement tends to be going to a place that you don't want to visit with the purpose of encouraging a group of people to either A, go to a place that they don't want to visit, right? B, engage in an activity that they may know little about, or C, learn about a cultural art that they may have very little interest in at the moment, right? At the moment. Now, I put that in there because my therapist told me I should say things like that. It was like, we're not there yet. So, Bithia.
I would put a D on there.
Okay, what's D?
An area, let's see, an act of going to a place that, okay, let me just have the top of my head. Inviting people who don't have access to something they would like to do and have been kept away from. So it can feel foreign, but it's not necessarily that they wouldn't want to be there or that they know a little bit, or if they do know a little, it's just because the engagement opportunities have not been available.
Right. So yeah, I think I hear that. And so when you're thinking about it, and I'll repeat, you know, Bithia was sharing that those who are working to engage in the community have oftentimes been very exclusive in their behaviors, right? And so when they're thinking about inviting another group, the other group actually probably has scars from all the times they were excluded from those conversations and from that place.
And they would love to go.
And they would love to go, right. And so there's that legacy of those exclusionary practices that are still the scars there. Yes? Now, cultural colonization. Again, so we said community engagement, and now we'll talk about colonization. Defined as some form of invasion, dispossession, and subjugation of the culture of a people. Many community engagement programs are created with this mindset. So we have a culture that we want to bring, and we want that culture to spread. And that's our end goal. So even when we're including another culture, we're only including that culture with the purpose of spreading our own. I'm learning your language in order to spread mine. Right? That's still a version of colonization. And so the invasion can begin as a geographical intrusion, leading to a marginalizing or discrediting of the artistic creations from the original inhabitants. The colonizer-colonized relationship benefits the colonizer at the expense of the colonized. And tokenism has also been used to mask the goal of cultural colonization. So we're doing a lot of this, but look, this one time we did that thing. Right? And so it was important to just get some clarity on what are we talking about? We'll talk a little bit more and unpack some of these things and pull them apart. But the first step is, what are we talking about? Tonight, this is what I'm talking about. Is all of these things and the ways in which they manifest themselves in communities, inside arts institutions, inside individuals. Someone told me once that this exclusionary practice is in my cells. And so I am working to get it out of my cells. I appreciated that. And so again, but it's so important right now to start naming the things. That's the first step in every 12-step process. I am a blank. You can't go to the other ones. You can't skip that one and get right to the tactical parts. You have to name what it is you're solving for first. So, my question for you, how have you seen these various definitions play themselves out in organizations and schools that you're part of? How have you seen, so I saw a lot of head nods, even for a lot of folks in the room anyway. I saw a lot of, damn, I've seen that, right? So I definitely recognize that folks have seen some of these things in practice. But again, the most important part is to do this with no blame, no shame, or no guilt. To manage whatever fragility might exist around some of the ways these things feel, and recognize that everyone appreciates what the intent was. There's an understanding probably even what the intent was. And so that there's no wrong, well, that probably was wrong, but what I would say is that, it's, turning the page from here, it begins naming the things of the past. So, has anyone seen this play itself out? Anything in the chat, Jess?
There is nothing in the chat right now.
Anyone here? How have you seen this play? Y'all all parts of the organization, so don't clown. Yeah.
I'll offer one.
Please.
A very narrow mindset in conservatory training that expects early training to be learned in a specific way, for specific works to be studied, and like stay within the guardrails, right? And it's and maybe towards later years, once the foundation has been established, maybe your own creativity or your own exploration of composers or different styles can be incorporated. But for now, we're going to start you on this path. Like it's a very fixed mindset on what success looks like.
Right. There was a comment here about kind of the fixed mindset of the training. The training is very much rooted in a single path, a single narrative, a single way of doing things in which it's either right or wrong. And so then someone who's in it doesn't see, it's like maybe once you've been in that single path, once you get to a point, people might say, okay, now you get to open yourself up a little bit to anything else. But inside the training, there's really one way of doing the things, which, right, that does create an extreme amount of rigidity that gets baked in. Right, especially if you've gone through music training, it 100% gets baked in, unless, of course, while you're going through that training, you're also doing some type of culturally specific work on the side. So you were going to conservatory and also playing in a mariachi band, right? Or you were going to a conservatory and you were playing electric violin and with a hip hopper, right? Then it was juxtaposed in the recipe, right? So what got baked in was this hybrid understanding of music. Most conservatories, though, that's not necessarily a thing. And actually, I was at a Yoyo conference a few years ago, and there was a student who I never forgot it. She talked about, she was from Southern California, and I think she might even be at Harvard right now, with her family has a mariachi band. I can't remember her name, but everyone else knows her. But she gave a keynote speech. You know, she was a high school senior, and she gave a keynote speech, and she talked about being in a youth orchestra. And she had gotten a scholarship. She was, concert master. She got a scholarship. Your concert master, she got a scholarship, take violin lessons, and she's doing these great lessons. And her teacher would always tell her that she sounds like mariachi, and she shouldn't sound like that. So, it doesn't sound too much like mariachi, like as if that was a bad thing, right? And so she quit. And I remember her story, because I was like, I wish I was this cool when I was 18, but she said, if you're going to reject my culture, then I reject you. And I was just like, I wish I had been that cool. Because personally, I was culturally assimilated. I was like, well, I want to be good, right? I want to get in. I want the keys to the castle. So I allowed myself to be assimilated. But her, she had the strength to be able to say, if you reject me, I'm going to reject you. I have the power to do that. And I thought that was fascinating. Anything else in the chat?
There are a bunch of things in the chat.
Okay.
So they're all projected up here. So the good
Yeah, okay.
intentions behind the METCO program growing up and how isolated my peers were in high school.
Yeah, I hear that, and that's interesting. The METCO program here in Boston, it's almost like a busing program from what I understand. It gives people who might be in public schools the opportunity to go to independent schools. But the impact of that has been a mixed bag depending on the individual. And this is an example for someone from whom it played itself out differently.
Plays itself out in most educational curriculums and in our everyday shopping experiences.
Yeah, right. Actually, this one from Hillary. People tend to talk inadvertently about community engagement programs as acts of charity, either with specific words, tone, or body language. Nothing makes me more angry than someone who is engaging in a community engagement program and they hold themselves to the standard that they would have had nothing without it, so at least they got something. Nothing pisses me off more than that. That is the most maddening thing that I have ever heard so often. They didn't have anything, so hey, we're glad we gave them something. Showing up is some type of a success. There is nothing that pisses me off more than that. I'm wearing it in my body because I can feel it, but it's very maddening to me because no one would say that about a kid at one of the independent schools here. No one would say that I went to an independent school and they didn't have anything, so we gave them something. That's good. We're just trying to keep those independent school kids off the streets. We don't want them to end up in a gang, so at least they're here showing up, here with us. Like that just drives me insane. Right? A young person is a young person. They're not a problem, they're not a solution. They're just a young person. And we have to talk about them the same. Talk about a student in a public school, same way we talk about a school and talk about a student at one of, at a boarding school or private school or the like. Talk about the titles to the not deserve. The same as an entitlement that some kids have, is the same as entitlement these other students should have as well. Sorry, I felt that in myself. Starting programs, particularly for homeless and incarcerated populations. Yeah, I definitely hear that. There are some wonderful institutions that do that, but not enough of them for sure. Yeah, I know Shelter Music here in Boston, they do work with the homeless. But there's not enough for sure. Fine art series that are in place within communities that present concerts from top tier that have never been to the before me in. Therefore, music does not. Yeah, right. Way to go, Cody. Cody is a former bassoon student of mine. Congratulations on the new job, by the way. So proud of you. I want to have that for the record. This is being recorded, right? Perfect. We'll send it to you, Cody. Yeah, I think that it's absolutely true. There again, that kind of speaks to the things we were talking about before. I like the way Ben hires, we're actually partnering with BCNC. Talked about the problem of lack of cultural humility. Yep. They go to a community assuming they have everything to share and nothing to learn. That is a byproduct not only of colonization, but also supremacy. Right? Like that's absolutely that. So for sure, thank you for that. European classical music, yep. Agreed. It's a way to keep the oppressed oppressed. Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks for the comments in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, and absolutely. And again, it very much feels like I'm preaching to the choir here. There's a bunch of folks who get it. And because everything you're saying is absolutely something that aligns with my core beliefs as well. So now let's reframe this concept of community engagement programs. It's going to require a bit of a reframe a little bit. And we're going to think about it from just a few perspectives. Think about it from the perspective of power is an important thing. Think about it from a perspective of the art and the culture that is being community engaged. And then think about it from the perspective of money, dollar bill, y'all, right? Because that's it, right? That is a component, and that is a piece that I think many communities tend to reject as it relates to community engagement programs. But we'll get to that in a second. Let's start with power, I think. Good. Okay, power. Power is the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or the course of events. I like these two folks from Black Panther. If you know these two, if you're seeing that movie, they are kind of representations of various relationships of Black communities, particularly in America, and colonizers. Person on the right, actually I love person on the left. Person on the left is Killmonger. Now, Killmonger, in this universe, in Marvel, the Wakandans actually have superior technology. They have some of the best technology in the entire world, but they've been keeping it really pretty much a secret. So Killmonger on the left, his thinking is, well, if this is a Black country in Africa, we have the best technology in the world, then we should function the way that colonizers function. So we should take our technology and rule the world, right? We should think very much like a colonizer. T'Challa on the right actually thinks, well, we should take our technology and share it with the world to create a more just world that includes our technology. And these two, they fight. T'Challa ends up winning in the end. Sorry to ruin the movie if you haven't seen it. Every Black person in America has seen it. But if you haven't seen it, the good guys win. Now, let's talk about how do we interrogate this concept of power? Here's the way to think about the concept of power. Whose challenge are we solving? First question. Sometimes the challenge that organizations are solving is we don't have enough people engaging in our stuff. We want more people to engage in our stuff. And so we're creating things to get more people to engage in our stuff. It's very much centered on, that's very much the way that a colonizer would think, right? Because it's about me, but what I need. And the only way for me to get what I need is for me to try to get you to give me what I need, right? The way I'm gonna get you to give me what I need is I'm gonna go and do this thing over there, so you're gonna give me what I need. So my humility is based on my need, because I have the power. I have the power to make that call. Who's creating the vision? Who has the power to make the vision? I talk a lot about where ideas are coming from, where they stem from. And Morgan, I'm sure Morgan Vector's on the line. She gave me some heat for something I wanted us to do a few years ago. And she was like, Lecolion, that was a terrible idea. You wanted to do the thing. Nobody wanted to do the thing, but you wanted to do the thing. We did the thing, and the thing didn't happen. It didn't work. She was right. Right? Morgan was 100% right. Because I created a vision for a project that I wanted. I didn't talk to anyone. I just created a vision of a thing that I wanted. And the reason I did that is I had the power to do so. And we ensure that partners and marginalized groups are empowered to drive the key aspects of the partnership. How baked is the thing before we start sharing it with people? Right? It's half baked. We got all the ingredients out, and all ingredients can only make one thing. And then we're like, hey, collaborate with us to make a thing with these ingredients. Right? It's like, well, if those ingredients only make one thing, right? So we're going to land with the thing that you want. So how involved are folks in that? Throughout the entire process, who's responsible for ensuring that we're engaging in an equitable partnership rather than being a service provider or a colonizer? It's actually something that we've been talking a lot about here at CMCB. What are the ways in which we're a service provider? And with some of our partners, we go in, we do the thing, we bounce. That's a service provider. We go in, we play the show, we're out. It's really dope when we're there for an hour and a half and then never to be heard from again until the next time that we're there to do the dope thing, right? But again, those things are all based in power. The ability to be able to do that is a power play. And then the last part here, who has veto power over the final product? That's the real power, is who can say this thing must stop now. This thing is doing harm. Or this thing is not meeting a goal of ours. So let's back up a little bit. Let's rethink this so that it meets our goal and maybe your goal too. But in a position of power, you would say it doesn't need to meet our goal. Not at first. That's what equity looks like. The majority of the things that have been created in history have been meant to solve problems for various groups of people. So it's, equity would say thinking differently moving forward. Arts and culture. So thinking about the culture. I love the Boondocks. If you have not watched Boondocks, it's a great cartoon. It was a great comic strip as well. This is my favorite, one of my favorite Boondocks cartoons. Huey is like very much, I'll read it out. Huey is very much a kind of a Black nationalist, really smart kid. And this girl, Jasmine, she really likes him a lot. She follows him everywhere. And he's always like, all about, he's very pro-Black. And so he says, Jasmine says to Huey, she's like, Huey, what does Euro whatever you said mean? And he said, oh, you mean Eurocentrism? And he says, well, it's when you eliminate the African perspective and marginalize or omit people of color, their contributions, their experiences, etc. Understand? And she's like, not really. And he says, well, do you ever watch Friends? And she says, yes. He's like, well, then you understand. I love that one because it's kind of like, yeah, that's kind of what it's like. Yeah, absolutely. That is what it's like as, watching Friends. It's a complete omission of kind of everyone else. So on this side, it's really thinking about what's the purpose of this cultural engagement, right? What's its purpose? Are we focusing our attention on the partners or marginalized groups' experience? I was talking to a colleague, and there was a community engagement program, and a lot of the thinking was around their donors. How are their donors engaging with this in this community engagement experience? It was about 50-50, which is way too much, right? So when you're thinking about, because then that led them to make some cultural decisions that are very much centered in that perspective. So they went to another place and they de-centered that community. But they centered it by location, but not by what was being presented. It's kind of a little bit to what Cody's point was earlier in the chat. Is our primary goal to amplify a current voice in the community or to introduce a new voice into a community? You know, one of my, a good friend, well, he's a good friend, this guy, I haven't talked to him in a long time. His name is Charles McKinney. Charles is at Rhodes College in Memphis. And I remember him saying to me once, just because you entered a conversation doesn't mean it just started. And that was very meaningful for me because it forced me to think about when I go into a place, my first responsibility is to understand what conversations are already happening. Right? So that's my first charge. My first responsibility is to understand what's already happening here. Because then maybe my second charge is to amplify something that's already there. Maybe my responsibility is not to go there at all. My responsibility is to figure out how do I amplify the things that are already here. Because that's not what a colonizer does. That's anti-colonization. Is spending the time and caring enough about a group's voices to search to see who are the voices in this community that I am duty bound to amplify. So that is what that second point was referring to. Or is it really, I just want to have a presence here, which is how a colonizer would think. Flag planted.
Where does that duty come from?
The question came from the audience. Where does that duty come from? Well, you know, it's kind of like even Kendi talks about that. You know, how to be an anti-racist, right? He says that it's recognized. It's kind of like a moral duty. He says that racism is just as bad for white people as it is for non-white people, right? Because it's impossible to have a moral authority, to be a moral authority if you are engaging and benefiting from that system, right? And so it would, I would think, come from a moral authority. Like I am duty bound as a, I know, I see you like, I ain't never say that, I hear you, right? But your question was, where should it come from? And I think it would come from a moral authority.
I would contend that it comes from who's holding the bag of money.
Right, that's the next one. Yeah, you're on the money. Yeah, right.
You
Yeah.
have no guilt. You have no problem.
Right, that's right. No, absolutely. Believe me, we're going to talk. The last 30 minutes is going to be about money, right? Because that's a big one, right? It is. It is. You're absolutely right. And the comment in was that it's really, a lot of these things have to do with money. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. So we'll definitely get there. And then the last one is our true goal to get a particular group of people to become more involved with our culture and our cultural institution. Right? Is that our real goal? Because if that's the case, then we're not going to spend very much time learning about another culture. We're not going to learn about that culture's artistic history. There are the artistic contributions, the future of the art in that particular culture. We're not going to root ourselves in that. We're going to learn just enough to be an entry point in the thing that we actually want. It's not ill intention. I just think it's kind of lazy. So the question is, how do we ensure that we are, that when we're engaging in a space that might have a different culture than the one that we're sharing, that we do the real work, the hard work of learning something. and understanding what is inside that culture already. What are the things that we should be amplifying? What are the things we should be supporting? Right? Rather than partnering at all. And then we'll talk next about the big elephant in the room. Money, money, dollar, dollar bill, y'all. Greenbacks, cheddar, bags, stacks. That's what we're talking about, right? Money. Because at the end of the day, in capitalist society, that's how things move. And one of the best frames for me when thinking about community work was to stop using things like under-resourced, underserved, and use language like disinvested, uninvested. People aren't buying things there. People aren't investing in this place. That's the problem to solve for. Underserved is very much a deficit frame, and it puts it assumes some passivity on the other side. I am to be served. You have been underserved, right? Under-resourced also, but it doesn't point the camera what the real problem is. And if the real problem is in who's investing. If you invest, things happen. That's how gentrification works. And gentrification is a product of investment, right? Greenbacks, actual money, dollars. So thinking about the whole money, the big elephant in the room, there's several here too. Money, that's the big elephant in the room. It isn't talked about nearly enough. And so the question is, who are we investing in to create a project? Not only who is at the table, but who are we investing in? And I think large nonprofits do this quite a bit. You get $1 million, and 90% of that million is internal, and then 10% goes external. Right? In some way or another. We're using the same vendors, calling on some of the same folks. We're covering our own staff support, but we're paying another place, for services rendered, and not supporting the general operating that partner also needs alongside us to be able to do this work. So thinking about how are we investing in a partnership? Which institutions are not receiving direct financial benefits from this project? This is one, and this is not only about institutions, this is about entire communities. Where is our reception? Who was the vendor? Who brought the food to our reception in the place where we were? Right? So thinking about it from a 360-degree perspective, how are we ensuring that when we get these resources, we don't then, in many ways, launder them back into the same system? But we're actually taking these resources and moving them through the system in a very different way. Because again, like Albert Einstein said, right? You can't solve a problem using the same thinking that you used when you created the problem. So it's a whole different set of operating principles. And what are the places that have the courage to do that? Who's receiving funding and how they're reinvesting that funding in an equitably inclusive way? And so when you're thinking about a partnership and you're thinking about what an institution receives, what your partners are receiving, what does that look like? Does that look like equity to you? And if it doesn't, that's a unique and a beautiful opportunity to reposition your thinking as an institution and the way in which the money flows out of your institution. Everyone's very cognizant of the way the money flows into an institution. but giving a lot of thought of then like, what happens to it? We're wanting to solve a problem, but are we really laundering money to perpetuate the problem over and over again? But only with different images on our press packet, but the problem is staying the same. And so it's being really thoughtful and asking that question of leadership, executive directors, board members, staff members, everybody who is in charge of doing anything that has to do with money, asking them, who were the vendors? Who did you contract for that? What did that look like? Who did we pay for that? Because that's where those in power actually have a unique opportunity to change the system. It's those in power who can do that. Because if you ain't looking, the system will perpetuate itself, right? Because again, it has created some momentum in and of itself. So it's those in power are the ones who can change that system. Oftentimes on the program side, sometimes it's like, I just want to keep I got to get this thing going. I got to get that going. I got to do that thing. You know what? This one's closest. Let's go there. Right? This was, okay, we use them every time. So let's just do that. Those in power can say, who are we using? No, this is what we're using. Wait a minute. Oh, really? Why don't we get a minority or woman-owned business to do that? Staff is like, oh, okay. You know what? I have power. I will find one. I will take care of it. I will find us one. We will work with them. Oh, working with this partner, wow, that was a wonderful collaboration. How did we share our resources with that partner? Did we pay them for that? No. They already had a program. We just came and played on it. We paid all our people. They already had something, so we didn't have to pay them. We just got to be on the program. It's great. We win. Okay, well, next year when we do that, I think we should sponsor this program. So we should, I think we should do it, but maybe next year we're going to be a sponsor. We're going to be a naming sponsor for this program because it was so impactful for our institution. We want to make sure that we turn the resources back into this community that has invited us in and allowed us to be a partner. So again, that's also a very different frame. It's a very different way of thinking about what a partnership can look like. Please. Yeah, no, let it out.
We have to examine why the money isn't invested in communities that don't reflect prior investment. Lack of money it does not equate lack of intellect.
Yeah, that's an important comment. This comment was made here is interrogating why resources aren't flowing to certain places and spaces and communities, and lack of money does not equate to a lack of intellect. That's a dope comment. Somebody should put that in chat. And you're absolutely right. But so the systems weren't necessarily built with that in mind. The systems are very much built in a white saviorist frame, right? Like that's how they were built, right? Let's give money to a white organization to then go into a community of color and do some work. That's how the system was built. Because those institutions, because of the way philanthropy works, they tended to be closer to philanthropy, right? Like that was the system. It's like, I'm a trustee on this thing. I want you to support a thing that I'm on the board of. That thing that you're supporting is working in a community over there, right? Like that is absolutely the way that the system works. Now, what I would say is philanthropy is on some level getting wind of that, right? Like, you know what? I'm not positive that is the pathway forward. So there's a lot more that's happening in disruptive philanthropy, where folks are like, well, who are the institutions who've always been supported by certain types of things? Let's stop supporting them. Let's reinvest some of those resources somewhere else. Because you know what will happen if you do that? These other ones will start acting right. Right? Because it's financially beneficial to act right. When it's financially beneficial to be a bad actor, then you continue to be a bad actor. It's like if you've been a bad actor for 50 years, and someone gives you $1 million to do better, right? Like, you're rewarding the bad actor. Would be a very different conversation. It's like, we're gonna not give you $1 million until you start acting better. So that $1 million we gave you, we're not giving you this time. Do better. Now, I'm not saying to completely destroy, because I understand that all of my colleagues in the world and this field, they have jobs and families, and these institutions are very important to the fabric of a city, right? And I do understand that. And so I would be the last one to say, let's turn the whole, I have friends who would say that. I have some friends who would say, let's start over, right? But I wouldn't necessarily say that, because again, I do recognize all of the things and the complexities of all this. I'm not saying the others don't, but I think that some who would just move faster than I would. So in this, I have no blame for individuals who move that fast. But my own framing would be, these are the types of things that should be interrogated for sure. And I think that this is a unique opportunity and time for philanthropy to ask the institutions they're supporting those really tough questions. Because that's the thing that drives that drives the narrative, that drives the programs, and drives the outcomes, right? Because no one's funding the thing, it tends to stop, right? Like, that's just kind of how the thing works. And so again, but it's kind of rethinking as an institution. I think also as partners. I've been thinking about this a lot in our own institution as well. How are we an effective partner with our partners? And we're not perfect at it yet, because we're just now learning to ask the question, what are you solving for? We're just learning that. And to be honest, it's leading to some very different conversations than the ones that I was having with our partners 3 years ago. One of my favorite ones, now we'll go on to the next slide, because I do have some pitfalls in this, the time for questions as well. I was at Health and Human Services partner, and I will never forget it, because this is a comment that changed my life and changed my overall thinking about how to effectively ask a question of what are you solving for? So it's a Health and Human Services partner, and that partner, I've shared the story with our staff many times. So folks, if you're on staff, you've heard me share the story probably 3 times at this point. But we asked, it was a day facility for individuals with cognitive disabilities. We've been doing music therapy there for quite a while, group music therapy. And I asked them, what were they solving for? And the thing that they were solving for wasn't activities. They were actually solving for the over-institutionalization of individuals with cognitive disabilities. And I was like, it's a lot of big words. They coming at me real fast. So I'm gonna take them as a sign of disrespect, right? What do you mean by that? And the explanation was extremely powerful to me. She said, well, in the 70s, we treat individuals with disabilities like plants. We water them, we give them some sun, and then we put them in a corner. And then she said, and then moving forward in the 80s and 90s, we treat individuals with disabilities like pets. We give them water and food, we take them out a little bit, run around, do some activities, and then it's back to the institution. And she said, but moving forward, we want folks to be humans, have access to all the things that a human would have access to. And she said, so for example, your institution comes here and you provide group music therapy for our individuals here. And it's lovely and it's wonderful. And it's very impactful. And the individuals in those programs, they love it. But what if someone wanted to learn to play the piano? What if they want to take guitar lessons? Like, that's not even something that is in the conversation, right? But you would have that conversation somewhere else. Why aren't we having the same conversation that you're having everywhere else? And that was really powerful to me. And I was glad that I asked the right question. I didn't ask her, what music program do you want next year? I would have gotten a different answer. Well, music therapy has been going great. Maybe you can come 3 times a week or 5 times a week. But I asked, what are you solving for? It led to a very different set of conversations with them. And so it's gonna, of course, for us, gonna then relate and get an entire different way of thinking about funding and how are we supporting that institution What are the things in our scholarship fund that we might be able to be working with individuals from this organization about? It's like a whole different, it's a different partnership. We're gonna do some of the same things, but I think some of the conversations are gonna be very different because now we're solving for something very different. And so again, it's really thinking a lot about what are we solving for? Next slide, and then.
Oh, question.
Oh, yeah, please. How do you, people always talk about what we say in hip hop. I want to say those first, Dorian Wallace. Method Man was that people always talk about what we say in hip hop, but never ask why we're saying it. Yay. Like I feel that for sure. Don't say that. That sounds bad. Anybody who's listened to Kendrick's new album, you know, I had to talk to my therapist about that one, you know, because it's deep. But I hear you. Right. Thank you. So how do you balance the idea that the most prominent organizations are the ones that have historically been the most exclusionary in their practices, and if they don't change, the best option for marginalized communities would be to abolish them altogether, but that it might never realistically play out that way? Yeah, so on my side, and I'll be humble here. One of my many flaws is I really believe in everyone. And I really believe in everything. As a Black man in America, my journey, my path, my experiences have given me every reason to have an antagonistic relationship with a lot of the systems and structures and institutions in this country. This is based on my own lived experience. But I actually believe in what this country could be, even though it isn't that. So I kind of walk in it in many ways with this belief in what it could be. And I think about that. I wrote about this a few years ago to our community here. It was in one of the many atrocities that have happened. Oh, gosh, what's damaging for me right now is not remembering which atrocity I was writing about. But I was writing to our community, and I told my relationship with integration. I was learning one thing in school, learning something completely different at home. Because I was like, I learned this in school. I go to mom and I'd be like, Mom, what happened there? She's like, no, that's not, no, we had to fight all the way home. And I had, with small town, we had to walk from school to school, picking kids up, fighting to get out. We didn't have the military, right? We just went in, right? They didn't send the military where we were. They might have sent some of the police force, but our local police force wasn't helping us. So we had to fight from one school, the oldest one got out of school first, and they went school by school, picking up siblings, fighting to get home. And that was every day. Then alongside that, I think about my grandmother and my grandmothers who went to church every Sunday. Church-going women, both of my grandmothers they went to church every Sunday. And every Monday, they sent their babies to those schools. Because they believe too. So that's how I was raised. I was raised with that. So the reason that I still believe in all of these things is because my grandmama taught me to believe. And so that's kind of my response to that one. Any other comments in the chat?
Yeah, right
now. Okay, then I'll go on to the last few things. There's some things to think about as you're going through. Just a couple of things to ponder. Common pitfalls. Common pitfall number one, cultural assimilation. So people are engaging in community engagement programs, but the real goal is kind of cultural assimilation. Institutions have to be ask themselves, what are they solving for? Are they solving to become different? We want to be different. We actually are looking at ourselves today, and we don't want to be this anymore. We're not trying to get better at doing this. We actually don't want to be this anymore. So then you're solving for, how do I become something different? Right, that's a different way of entering a conversation. And it can oftentimes, that can be the thing that can be protection against cultural assimilation. Because you're actually trying to transform what your institution is. You're not trying to just transform some of the things that you do. Right? So cultural assimilation would be one. And I gave a talk on this, this next one a while ago, tokenism. Right, that's the other one. Where there are these kind of symbolic efforts to do better. And so when you think about trying to transform who you are as an institution, that's very different than tokenism, which is actually a search for the minimum standard. Tokenism is like, how little of this do I have to do in order to not be considered a bad white organization? I was doing some work, and I'll never forget that. That was something that was stated. Like, the scariest thing is being labeled a bad white person. Nobody wants to be that. That's the scariest label. In that frame, that ends up being the goal. How do I keep myself from being labeled as bad? And that's the minimum standard. Right? And so when we're thinking about our institutions, when we're thinking about our community engagement programs, and whether or not we're being colonizers, right? It's not just the minimum standard. It's actually thinking about an entire transformation of our institution. Right? Like, that's the real goal. Because if it's the institution that has been built and mired in some of these systemic challenges that we're having right now, then it's in its cells. Right? So it needs to be fully transformed. With no blame, no shame, and no guilt. Just turn the page. Let's recognize where we are. Get that? Okay. So, where are we going? Is it on this trajectory, or is it a completely different? Now, the traditional community engagement programs, if people are engaging in them, their trajectory leads to the questions we're all asking right now. How are we sleeping on what was happening in our country? How did we miss it? So some of those things, some of them are wonderful, but some of them, they may be sleeping at the wheel. And so again, it's thinking about, well, if that's the case, then what is the new thing? And unfortunately, it's going to be different in every community around the country. I see a lot of you from places around the country that I know. It's going to be different everywhere. What works in Boston is not going to work in Cincinnati. It just isn't. But the framing and the type of learning does. The ability to ask the right questions, that is scalable and transferable.
I guess I want to yield to the question comment first before
Yeah, you made me think about all of the pride flags out this month. This is the level of engagement, the minimum. Yeah, so, and thank you for sharing that, Brenda. CMCB, I try to avoid doing anything for Black History Month. 0 things. As a Black man, I'm Black all 12 of the months. I'm not Black in February, and I'm like, whoo, got past February, that was hard. Man, I'm glad I can go back to being something else now. I'm Black all 12. Right, so I kind of ignore institutions that do Black History Month things unless I look at their season, and my existence has been acknowledged all year. If it's an MLK Day, a Black History Month, and then that one other thing, I'm like, bro, I'm out. Because I'm Black all year. And so to Brenda's point, yes, that is, some of those things are the minimum. On our side, I try to think about the year before and how much work have we done in thinking about a various group, and if it wasn't equitable, we haven't earned the right. If I look at our season and it's not equitable, we don't have the right. We haven't earned the right to be able to do that. And so I agree with you, Brenda, very much that there's a lot of the minimum. It's kind of like, what's the fad right now? What marginalized? Let's play the oppressed Olympics. Like who wins the gold medal for oppression this year? And let's amplify that group. Right? It's the oppression Olympics. And there's something that we do culturally, I think, in many ways in this country. And so it's really trying to say, well, let's actually stop doing that. Let's really get a good sense of what equity and inclusivity and belonging and what all those things actually mean from a social justice perspective. Yeah.
So am I on track to think that the way that we do this work, right, regardless of what racial makeup we had at birth, is to be comfortable with ourselves that we all have needs, as opposed to, I can put on this facade so nobody will know. Nobody will know that I feel, vulnerable. But if we're in touch with our own vulnerability, it's easy to relate to another person, as opposed to community again, being the vulnerable, as opposed to being human beings like me who are vulnerable in whatever way. I feel like that excavation of self would simplify a lot of this, because money is not the answer. You know what it's like to give somebody, on his birthday, you get a card from a relative who never will call you the rest of the year, and they give you $20, and you go and buy something like, it's just a symbolic move.
Right, yeah, no, absolutely. That's where that, the idea, the purpose is to marry. Right? Your success is dependent on my success. Right? That's a marriage. Right? The comment made here was thinking a lot about how are we in all of our various identities, what are the ways in which we are thinking about being together and perpetually, not just giving some money once or twice a year or something like that, like you get the birthday card on your 15th, 16th, 17th birthday from a person who never talks to you, right? But how do we talk about having relationships and a partnership and being in it together, right? And my response to that was, again, it's like the understanding that the end result is to marry. Your success is mine. If I'm part of your success, I have succeeded too. The ecosystem has become better because you succeeded. Right, and so absolutely. We have a few minutes, but
one question from Janet.
No, yeah, sure, I'll answer Janet's question. Actually, let me go back to this one because when you mentioned a word that is a word that I appreciate a lot, is vulnerability. Vulnerability and humility are important words, I think, to recognize. So I'm going to go back, and forgive me for harping on the Yo-Yo thing, but he was just here today. And so one of the things he said, so Yo-Yo and I met at this party. He was talking to some folks, I knew the folks. I go up to him and I'm like, we chat, and he's, I'm like, hey, you're a cellist. And he's like, I'm going to forget. He didn't say that. But he is, right? But he was like, we started chatting. I was like, well, I'm a bassoonist. He was like, oh, well, do you know the Mozart bassoon and cello duet? And I was like, I'm a bassoonist. Of course I know the Mozart bassoon and cello duet. So he kind of laughs and turns his back. A few minutes later, he comes back over and starts singing the cello part to the Mozart bassoon and cello duet. So he kind of, if anyone who knows him knows, yeah, right. He gave me the look. He's like, is it happening? And so I start singing the bassoon part to this Mozart bassoon and cello duet. And then we get, we're probably 40 measures in. Everyone around us is like, what is happening? We go through a lot of this. He's like, you're a musician. And I was like, yeah, I'm a musician. And he was like, give me your phone right now. We have to connect. So we exchanged cell numbers. On my way, after the party, on my way, I sent him a text just saying, I guess I have to start practicing now. We're gonna get together and play duets. But I recorded a CD of music for bassoon by Black composers. I'd love to send it to you. And Yoyo said, please, here's my address. Stranger, person he just met. He's like, here's my address. So he sends me his address. I go home and tell my wife, I was like, right? My wife's also a musician. So she's like, no, yeah, look, it's right here. It's on my phone. And so I'm telling her this story, go to bed. The next morning, I wake up to a text from Yoyo. And he's like, oh my gosh, no need to send me your CD. I've been listening to it all morning. I found it online. We totally have to do something. Let me connect you with my team. So connects me with this team. We try to get things scheduled all year. They're really in it. They do multiple things with the CMCB community through this chance encounter. The reason I bring all that up is because Yoyo described it. And I love the way he described it. He said that it was so nice because there was so much vulnerability. Lecolion and I, we took chances on each other. I took a chance to sing this thing. It was probably awkward for him, but he took a chance to sing back. And then Lecolion took another chance to tell me about his CD. I took a chance to listen to it, right? Then we took a chance to try to find a way for us to collaborate. And it turned into these beautiful partnerships that we've got. And so the reason I say that, because the vulnerability is the path forward. We have to learn to take a chance on each other. When we think about community engagement, it's not the military way of an engagement that we're fighting, but it's like we're taking a chance on each other. Like that's the real, to me, path forward. And I'll go to Janet's question, which is really from Jim Pyatt. I guess Janet doesn't like that question, so she's like, don't keep my name out of your mouth. That's not for me. So let's go to Janet's question. Opportunities in CMCB, other realms comparable to the music therapy versus music lessons. Yeah, they are now in my, I think they are becoming a little bit more aplenty. I know we have some community engagement folks here on the line, but I think that we're really trying to think a lot about how are we, as a leader, the way that I think about things is trying, a leader doesn't necessarily control the product, a leader controls the question, right? If you control the question, then in many ways, you are controlling the product because you're controlling everything that everyone is solving for, right? Everyone's trying to solve for that problem. And so the thing that we're solving for right now is when someone enters our institution, how do we ensure that they understand that we're an entry point to an entire universe, an entire ecosystem of opportunities, and not just within CMCB. So it's not just with us. We have a project right now. We got some funding from the NEA and Our Town grant with a partnership with the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, and it's a youth employment program. So we have young people, who are working with us, but they are learning about arts administration. And next year, we're expanding that program. So we're going to partner with multiple institutions so that when a student is a part of one institution, they actually have access to all of the other ones and the opportunities that they may have. Some of them are Dance Institute, like Abilities Dance is working with us. Some of them are on the youth development side. Boston, I mentioned before, Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center, people want to do neighborhood and community-based work. And so a person can come into CMCB through Bassoon, but then they can have access to the rest. And so that's really the thing that we're now solving for. In one of our school programs, it's the same thing. We're starting to work more in high schools. We're doing music production and songwriting in a school. And so we're trying to figure out how to include that group of individuals into our youth employment program so that they also have access to the entire ecosystem as well. And so those are the things that we are solving for. I would not say that we have solved for them, but those are things that we are solving for right now. And in response to Janet's question. No, sorry, Jim's question, not Janet. Anything else from the chat before we close?
Nothing that I can.
Any other questions from here before we close? Well, in closing, I think I said some of this before. Oftentimes when I do engagements, speaking engagements or working with organizations, I oftentimes feel that some of the things land harsh. But it's really from a place of love. And the truth is, I love this thing so much, and I believe in it so much that I feel duty bound to interrogate it from a place of love. I feel duty bound to share with it the places where it should be better. And I also feel duty bound to share the places where I'm flawed in this system too. Because again, I think that it requires all of us to do that, to be able to name things from a perspective of strength and interrogation, but also from a place of humility, that we don't have the answers either. But the truth is, I think that if we start interrogating these systems in this way, I believe that we're going to actually find the answers together, which is the real goal in the end. So again, thanks everyone. Thanks to those of you who are online. Thank you to everyone who was here in person. We definitely appreciate you all. And again, stay connected to CMCB next Saturday. If you are in the South End, please come to Fête de la Musique. We have a neighborhood festival here. We're going to have a block party closing off Warren Avenue out here. And we will have events at 2 other parks, at Union Park and a Ringgold Park in the neighborhood as well. So please come and check us out and enjoy a Saturday afternoon with CMCB. But again, everyone have a great summer. This is our last community conversation of the year. So everyone have a great summer. And again, thank you all so much for being with us and for coming out today. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.